We're giving the equity to Ethan, Dad said. Now get out. You're fired. The boardroom remained composed. No one reacted visibly. The investment bankers kept their hands folded over leather portfolios. Outside counsel stared at the valuation deck projected across the far wall. My name had already been removed from the executive slide. Under founder and chief architect, there was now a blank line. Behind Dad, the transaction summary displayed a clean number. $1.2 billion. Mom leaned forward slightly. This transition reflects long-term strategic alignment, she said, as if she were clarifying a calendar adjustment. On the screen beside the valuation model, a notification appeared. Administrative access revoked. The revocation timestamp matched the minute of the announcement. I was not asked for comment. The acquisition partner across the table nodded once, as if this had always been the structure. Ethan sat 2 chairs down from me, hands clasped, eyes forward. He did not look at me. So you sold my code? I asked evenly. Mom smiled without turning her head. We sold our company. At the far end of the table, the FBI agent observing the transaction closed his folder and stood up. I watched the slide deck move to the next page. The valuation did not change, but the assumptions behind it had. There is a particular stillness that comes when something you built is reassigned in a single sentence. If you have ever been removed from a structure you designed, you understand the distinction between participation and authorship. Before I explain what happened next, I want to ask you one question. What does ownership mean when the room decides you are no longer necessary? If this story resonates with you, not emotionally but structurally, consider subscribing. Not for spectacle. For clarity. Because what followed was not an argument. It was documentation. When I incorporated the company at 24, I structured it simply. I retained 62% of the founding shares. My parents provided early capital, $3.8 million across 2 convertible notes. The terms were informal at first. We were operating as a family-backed startup. The expectation was alignment. When the notes converted, they collectively held 28%. The remaining equity was allocated to an employee option pool and a small strategic advisor grant. For the first 2 years, governance was casual. Board meetings were held at the house. Minutes were recorded but rarely formalized. My parents had business experience. I had technical authority. It felt balanced. Revenue scaled quickly. Our infrastructure optimization platform reduced enterprise cloud expenditure by an average of 31%. By year 4, we had contracts with 3 Fortune 100 companies and 2 federal agencies. At that stage, formal governance should have tightened. Instead, we expanded informally. Dad assumed more operational visibility. He negotiated vendor relationships. Mom handled external communications. Ethan, who had recently exited a smaller SaaS project, joined as strategic growth director. No one revised the bylaws. No one updated the intellectual property assignment schedule beyond the original founder agreement. The assumption, repeated in passing, was that majority operational influence equaled control. When acquisition interest began, my parents led negotiations. I focused on maintaining system stability and long-term product architecture. The buyers believed they were negotiating with majority influence. Influence is not the same as ownership. But we never corrected the language. Overconfidence does not usually present as arrogance. It presents as certainty that documentation reflects intention. In our case, documentation reflected authorship. That distinction remained quiet. Until it didn't. Design the platform architecture personally. The core optimization engine, the component that reduced compute waste and dynamically reallocated workloads, was not a generic module. It was built on a proprietary orchestration framework I wrote over 18 months. I structured the build pipeline under a private repository cluster. Deployment keys were distributed through role-based access, but root administrative control remained under my certificate. This was not secrecy. It was efficiency. When engineers needed escalation privileges, I provisioned them. When third-party integrations were added, I authenticated them. Operationally, everything appeared distributed. Structurally, it was centralized. During acquisition due diligence, the buyers audited performance metrics, security compliance, and customer contracts. They confirmed that the company owned its code base. They did not examine the licensing appendix attached to the founder agreement. No one asked who authored the orchestration kernel prior to incorporation. It was assumed that company developed equaled company owned. My parents repeated that phrase frequently during negotiations. I did not correct them. Replacement planning was discussed openly. Transition should be smooth, one of the private equity analysts said. I agreed. From a surface level, it would be. Systems do not fail when a name changes on a slide. They respond to permissions. Several people have since asked why I did not speak up during the meeting. The answer is simple. Interruption introduces ambiguity. Ambiguity complicates documentation. The acquisition contract was structured around representations and warranties. Any active dispute during signing would have triggered additional review. Review delays closing. Delays invite renegotiation. Renegotiation creates leverage shifts that are unpredictable. Silence preserves clarity. People confuse access with ownership. Allowing the transaction to close under their assumptions ensured that those assumptions became measurable. If I had protested in the boardroom, the matter would have become emotional. By remaining silent, it remained contractual. I did not need to win an argument. I needed the documentation finalized. The deal closed 48 hours later. Press releases were distributed. Strategic acquisition positions company for global scale. My parents conducted interviews describing the company as a family-built success story. Ethan was introduced as incoming CEO. Internally, I complied with every formal request. I transferred operational dashboards. I documented deployment processes. I signed the executive separation agreement. I attended the final all-hands meeting where Ethan thanked me for laying the foundation. My company email was converted to an external forwarding address. My building badge deactivated at 6:02 p.m. I returned my company-issued laptop. No one asked about the private repositories. No one requested the root certificate transfer. The acquisition schedule included a clause stating that all company-owned intellectual property had been assigned to the buyer. That statement was accurate. It did not include pre-incorporation proprietary frameworks licensed to the company under perpetual but conditional use terms. The closing dinner was held downtown. I did not attend. Instead, I archived my personal development environment and reviewed the executed documents. Every signature was in place. The valuation remained $1.2 billion. The assumptions remained intact. 3 weeks after closing, the first structured inquiry arrived. It was not hostile. It was procedural. The new CTO requested confirmation of repository transfer credentials. I replied with a copy of the intellectual property schedule. The document was straightforward. Upon incorporation, I had assigned all derivative works created under company funding. However, Appendix C listed a pre-existing proprietary orchestration framework, the kernel upon which the optimization engine operated. The framework was licensed to the company under perpetual operational use, contingent upon founder certification of compliance. The license was non-transferable without written authorization. This clause had been included by the original law firm at my request. At the time, it seemed like a precaution. Now it was architecture. The repository cluster housing the kernel was not company property. It existed under my independent holding entity, established before incorporation. The company had deployment rights. They did not possess modification authority, nor could they migrate the kernel without access to the encrypted license file. The license file was tied to a digital certificate authenticated through my private key. Without that certificate, the kernel operated in stable mode. Stable mode limited scalability beyond a predefined threshold. The company had never reached that threshold during my tenure. The acquisition plan included aggressive expansion projections. Expansion would trigger the threshold. The threshold required certification. Certification required authorization. Authorization required me. This was not concealed. It was documented. But documentation is often read selectively. Dependency does not announce itself until growth demands it. The symbolic objects were simple. A repository admin panel I still controlled. An encrypted license file stored offline. A digital certificate tied to my private key. None of these were dramatic. They were structural. The buyers initiated their first large-scale integration 60 days post-acquisition. They expanded into European data centers and attempted real-time multi-region workload redistribution. At 64% projected capacity, performance variance began. Nothing catastrophic. Latency spikes. Intermittent authorization delays between nodes. The engineering team attempted patch modifications within the application layer. The instability persisted. They escalated. The kernel reported certification verification pending. The new CTO's team attempted to regenerate the authentication sequence. Access denied. Not because of sabotage, because root authority was external. During migration testing, automated scaling scripts triggered the predefined threshold. The system defaulted to stable mode parameters. Capacity plateaued. Revenue projections assumed elasticity beyond that plateau. The plateau held. Buyers scheduled a technical review call. I attended as an external licensor. I answered each question precisely. No defensiveness. No resistance. The system was functioning exactly as licensed. They owned the company. They did not own the kernel. During the third review call, outside counsel joined. I shared my screen and displayed Appendix C. Clause 4.2 outlined transfer restrictions. Clause 5.1 specified scalability certification requirements. Clause 7.3 clarified that derivative application layers did not confer ownership of the underlying orchestration framework. I explained calmly, you own the application code developed post-incorporation. You own the brand, the contracts, the infrastructure agreements. You possess perpetual operational rights to the kernel in its certified configuration. Expansion beyond that configuration requires licensor authorization. There was no accusation in my tone, only clarity. The valuation assumed unrestricted transfer. The documentation reflected conditional license. Those are different assets. Silence followed. Then a request for a copy of the original founder agreement. I sent it immediately. Over the next month, legal correspondence increased. Not aggressive, methodical. The acquisition firm's attorneys cross-referenced the merger agreement with the intellectual property schedules. They examined representations made during diligence. My parents had affirmed that the company possessed full rights to its technology stack. That statement was accurate within operational scope. It was incomplete regarding expansion rights. The distinction became central. Financial models were recalculated. Projected growth curves flattened without certification. Enterprise clients awaiting global deployment requested timeline clarification. Internal memos circulated describing unexpected architectural constraints. The private equity board convened a special session. My parents attended. Ethan presented revised scaling timelines. The buyers requested a comprehensive technical dependency report. The report concluded that core scalability relied on licensor authorization. Licensor me. The FBI agent who had attended the original signing returned for compliance review. There was no criminal allegation, only verification of disclosure accuracy. Documentation was examined. Emails were reviewed. At no point had I misrepresented ownership. At no point had the kernel been assigned to the corporation. The dependency had existed from inception. It had simply not mattered until valuation depended on it. In one recorded board meeting, Dad asked external counsel whether the license could be voided under implied transfer doctrine. Counsel replied that the signed founder agreement explicitly preserved pre-existing IP rights. Another attorney asked whether forced assignment could be pursued. The response was cautious. Litigation would stall operations for years. During litigation, certification would remain unavailable. Enterprise clients do not wait for unresolved IP disputes. Valuation adjustments were proposed. Downward. The acquisition firm signaled concern about misaligned asset characterization. My parents began referring to the kernel as a technicality. Private equity does not evaluate technicalities. It evaluates risk. Risk recalculates price. Recalculation alters leverage. The leverage had shifted quietly the moment the boardroom slide changed my title. I was not present for most of these discussions. I received summaries through formal channels. The tone evolved from celebratory to corrective. Ethan requested a private call. I declined. Communication remained through counsel. There was no collapse in the dramatic sense. No shouting. No public scandal. Just spreadsheets adjusting. Contracts reinterpreting. Confidence narrowing. Reality correcting assumptions. The company still functioned. It simply could not become what they had priced it to be. 90 days post-closing, I received a formal proposal. They requested full assignment of the orchestration framework in exchange for a negotiated payment significantly below proportional valuation impact. The offer included a potential advisory role. I reviewed the numbers. They did not reflect the structural value of unrestricted scalability. Through counsel, I responded. The existing license would remain intact. Certification could be provided under revised enterprise licensing terms. No equity reentry. No operational position. No discounted transfer. Authorization would be priced according to market expansion value. The response was professional. Brief. Final. Negotiations continued for several weeks. Eventually, they executed a long-term enterprise license agreement. The company retained operational continuity. I retained authorship. There was no reinstatement. No apology. None was required. When I look back at the boardroom moment, I do not remember humiliation. I remember precision. Authorship is not emotional. It is structural. Building something from first principles creates layers that are often invisible to those who focus on presentation. Ownership is rarely about who speaks the loudest in a meeting. It is about who defined the dependencies before the meeting existed. My parents believed equity percentages equaled control. The buyers believed acquisition equaled transfer. Both assumptions were logical within conventional frameworks. But this company was not built conventionally. It was built on a kernel authored before capital arrived. Capital accelerated it. It did not create it. There is no satisfaction in watching a valuation recalibrate. Numbers are neutral. They adjust when inputs change. What remains constant is documentation. If you create something foundational, document it. If you license it, define the boundaries. If you are removed, remain still long enough for the structure to speak. The company continues operating under expanded licensing terms. Its growth is aligned with contractual reality. Ethan leads it. My parents remain shareholders. I remain the author of the kernel that makes it possible. We occupy separate structures now. No hostility. No reconciliation. Just clarity. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. A transaction closed. An assumption surfaced. A license was enforced. And the code, the original code, remained exactly where it began. Under my name. Irreversible.